In this video, I was going to start talking about how we actually find businesses once we've decided on the kind of business that we would like to buy. But then I realized that I've missed something fundamental, and that is making sure that we have the ability to execute. If you start speaking to sellers and you're unprepared or you do not have confidence in your ability to do this, you're going to come across as an amateur, and that's going to kill all credibility. So in this video, we're going to look at the 3 things that I think you need to be on top of before you contact anybody. And the first is making sure that you have the right skills to run the business. This could be you by yourself or potentially bringing on partners or outsourcing to help fill any skill gaps that you might have. Secondarily is financing. You are going to need to spend some money and have some capital up front. There's no point talking to anybody if you don't have enough money to close a deal in the first place. So we're going to spend a bit of time looking at the amount of money that you actually need and the options you have to fund a deal. And then finally is mindset. Once we have confidence in our skills and confidence in our finances, we also need to get ourselves to a place that we believe that we can execute, that we believe that we can do this. Otherwise, when the moment comes, you're not going to be able to pull the trigger. Now keep in mind, you're never going to have 100% confidence that all of this is going to be about taking risk and figuring things out as we go. But I do think that we can give ourselves some basic comfort so that when the moment comes, we can close a deal. If you're new here, my name is Mark, and I've left my corporate job to try and buy and run my own business. And I'm sharing the messy reality of this process for a first-time buyer in the UK. So let's dive in. Businesses come in all shapes and sizes, which is great because it means we can find one that's the right size and affordability and complexity for us, whatever stage we are on this journey. At one end, you've got maybe single person businesses. This might be something like owning some vending machines or a laundromat, or perhaps even running just a small campground, for example. These are going to be low complexity. You can probably do it yourself. Whereas if we look at the other end of the spectrum, we have corporate behemoths like, let's say, Microsoft, which had 228,000 employees last year or something like that. They're going to have whole management teams. It's going to be an incredibly complex organization and frankly unaffordable for anybody, let alone us as first-time buyers. And between these two poles, we have a whole gradient of businesses that we might consider, and this is both reflecting the complexity of these businesses to run as well as the financial dimensions as well. So if we were to go up a level from our campground or our laundromat, then we're probably looking at small service businesses. You could imagine something like a small cleaning company or lawn care or something like this, where it's you and perhaps 3, 4, 5 employees. It's going to be more complex than a single person business, but probably still manageable for us. Going up a level from here, we're looking at businesses that maybe have a dozen, 2 dozen, 3 dozen employees. A business like this is going to be more expensive for one, but also more complex to buy. You can imagine that you're going to need processes and systems and a way to manage and orchestrate the activities of all of these people. If we keep on going up the scale, then we have sort of fairly large organizations that aren't quite corporate behemoths just yet, but you might have 100 employees and are going to be a complex and expensive thing to run, especially if you're not already independently wealthy or just have really wealthy parents who are bankrolling you for this whole exercise. For our purposes, I'm going to assume that we're working towards the lower end of the scale, and for me in particular, I think that an organization that has maybe a couple of dozen employees is probably about the right size for me, but that is because I come from a background of running large teams. At the peak, I was running a team of about 120, doing tens of millions every year, so I'm fairly comfortable towards the middle of this scale. You might not have that same background, and you might want to aim for something slightly smaller so that 1, you can afford it, but 2, it is just more manageable for you while you grow and learn and work on these skills and work towards running something bigger in time. Independent of the size of the business, there are certain domains that you're going to be aware of. There are certain functions that every business needs, and these are going to get more and more and more intense depending on the size of the business that you're working on. For example, you're going to have general management, administration, human resources, sales and marketing, finances, public relations, purchasing, and production if you're a product company, or service delivery if you're providing a service. You don't need to be an expert in all of these different domains. I'm certainly not, but you do need to be aware that there are things that will need to happen within your business, and if you can't do it personally, then somebody else is going to have to. That could look like taking on a partner and bringing in someone with complementary skills, or it could mean outsourcing some of these functions. And you're going to want to think a little bit about what this looks like for you and make sure that you're covering all of these bases. But again, if you start with smaller companies, then the demands for each of these things is lower. You can imagine the marketing for a campground is going to be a different situation than marketing for a service company that has 30 employees. If you do bring on a partner, what I would encourage you to do is make sure that they are bringing unique skills and complementary skills to the business. There's no point bringing on someone that's just like you with the same skill set, because one, they're not bringing anything additional to the business that the business can't already do, and two, it creates this tension where it's not clear who is doing what if you can all do the same thing. For me personally, one of the things when I went through this exercise was recognizing that sales and marketing is not a thing that I'm tremendously good at or tremendously enjoy, and I much prefer the technology and the operation side of things. And one of the deciding factors to bring in my business partner Simon was that he comes from a sales and partnership background, and he can focus on that stuff, freeing me up to focus on the stuff that I'm good at and I want to do, and together we complement each other's skill set in that way. Finally, I would say if you're bringing on a partner and they are coming into the business and you need to give them equity, then you're going to want to make sure that they're contributing some capital to this arrangement as well. There's a book called The E-Myth, which has some great considerations when considering buying business partners and how you work out the organization chart and who does what. I'm going to come back to this in a future episode, but it's recommended reading for you anyway if you're considering this journey of buying and running your own business. Let's talk about financing and making sure that you have enough money to buy the kind of business that you're looking to buy. When I started investigating acquisition entrepreneurship, or buying a business and running it, there was lots of stuff that I came across that basically said you can put no money down or a very small percentage and successfully buy a business. What I came to realize as this is a very American-centric view. The Americans have a government agency called the Small Business Administration, which backstops some of the loans to people when they buy businesses, which means that they get lower interest rates and they can borrow basically up to 90% of the value of a business from the bank. In the UK, we don't have such a generous subsidy, such a generous option from our own government. It's frankly just a less business-friendly environment than the Americans have, which means you're gonna need to put up more money to start with, and the loans that we're gonna take are gonna be that much more expensive, unfortunately. But we shouldn't hide from that fact. We just have to accept that that is the reality of the environment that we're operating in, and making sure that we have enough money when it really comes down to it. You're going to need some capital, is the long and short of it, and how much really depends on the profitability of the business that you're going to buy. The way that we generally value businesses is we take EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization, and then we have a multiple. So a general multiple would be between 3 and 8 times EBITDA gives you the valuation of a business. If we consider EBITDA of, let's say, 200,000, and this isn't quite the same as take-home profit at the end of the year, but you can think of it a little bit like that, we can see that a 5 times multiple takes us to a business value of about £1 million. That sounds daunting, but there's different ways that we can structure this. One thing that remains consistent across the American and UK options for buying a business is what's called seller financing. This is the seller basically loans you a proportion of the money to buy their business, and you pay this back to them over time, essentially using the profits from the business to pay for the business over the time. This could be up to about 50% of the business value, but depends on the discretion of the seller as well. You can't take this for granted, but it is a common practice. To bridge the gap in between seller financing and the capital that we have today, you can get a bank loan. In the language of acquisition, this is known as senior debt. You can speak to a finance broker and they will talk to you a little bit about your eligibility and whether this is something that is suitable for you. You should know that this might be 10% interest rate, something like that for senior debt, and you need to factor that into your numbers when you're working out the size of business that you can realistically afford. Finally, there's your own capital. So this is your savings. This is money that you perhaps borrow from friends, from family. You might need to take on a partner, as I have, that brings capital with them, or you might take on investors. And if you're bringing on investors, they're probably going to want some equity. So don't give that away lightly. If you're going to invest all your time and effort and money into this business, you want to try and reap those rewards for yourself. So just take the money that you need. Don't get carried away taking on investors. Ideally, your investors can offer additional things to the business as well, such as support or mentoring or guidance, but those things are nice to haves, not essential. For me personally, I had a rental property that I bought with a friend a few years ago, which I sold. That gave me my initial outlay for this, plus savings, plus I've taken on a business partner, plus a couple of people have offered to invest, which I haven't taken advantage of just yet, but I'm keeping that in my back pocket just in case I need it for later. Whatever route you choose, you need to make sure that you can actually afford to repay your debt. And one quick way that you can look at this is what's called the debt service coverage ratio. This is the ratio of the cash flow of the business to the repayments that you will need to make for your debt. If we were to say that this was 1 times, then that says that every penny that your business makes in cash flow goes to paying back the loan. This is obviously not a desirable situation. You're going to want to take some profits, have some money to reinvest into the business, and realistically, you're going to need at least 1.25 times before a bank will even consider this. But ideally, you're going to want 1.5 as a comfortable minimum, if not 2. 2 would mean that you're making twice as much as your debt is required to pay. And this just gives you a bit of a buffer to make sure if business goes up and down, you can still afford to pay your debt, because running out of money, running out of cash flow is the quickest way that businesses die, and we want to avoid that at all costs. I'll link a calculator in the description of this video so you can play around with these numbers and get a sense of how much you can afford. That way you'll know what your affordable range is, and when a deal comes along, you're going to make sure that you have enough money to afford the right side of business, and frankly, you can target your search to a band of affordability. There's no point looking at businesses that you can't afford today, so this just gives us a bit of comfort. Let's talk about mindset. I've left this part to last because this is really about being sure in yourself, and I think until you have the previous 2 steps under control and feel confident in them, you're never going to be completely sure that you're ready to go. But once you're sure about your skills, either by yourself or as part of a team, and your financing, really all it comes down to is making sure that you and yourself are ready to go. The first thing I think we need to understand here is you're never going to be completely certain. There is always going to be unknowns, you can't predict the future, and I think a logical bar to try and get to is get yourself to 70% certain that you are ready for this and then go. Otherwise, I think you just can spend forever running around, thinking about all the different possibilities and never actually get going. I think you need to have a bias for action and get going. Yes, you shouldn't go off half-hearted, and you should make sure you've done your research, but at some point you've just got to go for it. If that whole idea makes you feel pretty uncomfortable, if you're not sure you can figure things out as you go, then maybe you need to really question whether this journey is for you. What's really helped me in this process is trying to think of things like a scientist, and I'm coming up with hypotheses, and then I'm designing experiments, and then I'm testing my hypotheses and gathering data. This feels easier to me than success or fail or thinking in these ways, and in small scales, this has been really useful in terms of just getting me to take action and move forward. An example, when I first started contacting sellers, I was pretty intimidated. This was going from the ideas of theories and books and all of the stuff that I had just knocking around in my own head to actually speaking with other people. I decided, since I was cold calling and cold approaching other businesses, that I would test a hypothesis that business owners would be more receptive, particularly since I was aiming at people more retirement age and older, to a letter rather than an email or a phone call that they weren't expecting. So the first experiment that I devised was the letter that I wrote, and then I hand wrote the envelopes, because my hypothesis was also that people were more likely to read a letter if it had a handwritten address rather than something that I'd printed. I also put a unique QR code on every letter in the hopes that they would scan that, and then I would be able to track that in the background and see who had read it and who hadn't. When I actually ended up following up with my letters and cold calling and speaking to people, what I found is most of them had read the letter. What had proved accurate was that they had been more receptive to a letter, and particularly the handwritten address, but none of them had scanned the QR code. So my hypothesis that that was a good approach had failed. In subsequent letters, I've done away with the QR code. It didn't work, but by treating it all as an experiment, I've been gathering data, understanding how things work, and adapting my approach as I go. This has been a lot easier than just setting myself up for success or fail and thinking in that way. One of the ideas that was helpful during this was the idea of ABZ planning, and this comes from a book called The Startup of You. If you're a Tim Ferriss fan, you might have also heard him talking about fear setting as an exercise, and that also applies here, but I'm going to talk about ABZ planning today. So this is a pretty basic exercise. You're going to think about your plan A, and that is the plan that you are currently on. For me, this was my corporate career and the company that I'd been investing in for years. And you're going to write out the pros and cons of staying on that path. Plan B is going to be what we're talking about here, buying and running your own company. And I want you to work out the pros and cons of what that looks like. And then finally, plan Z. This is what you fall back on. If everything goes wrong, if this doesn't work out in the way that you want, then what is that fallback plan? For me, I realized that yes, I might be leaving my corporate job, and if this plan didn't work, then yes, I might lose some money, but the reality was I could go back to contracting, I could find another corporate job. My worst case scenario was a manageable scenario for me, and I think an important part of getting your mindset is making sure that you're clear on what your fallback position is, and making sure that you're comfortable with that too. Another exercise that I did when I was thinking about this is imagining myself as an old person, looking back at this moment in time, and I realized that whatever happens from here, I'd be more proud of myself for having a go and taking a shot rather than staying in a safe and predictable job where I was becoming increasingly unhappy. This has given me conviction that I have my plan A, my plan B, and if everything goes wrong, I'll have a plan Z. Yes, there is some risk in this, but again, you only need to get yourself to 70% certain. So before you start sourcing deals, you need to make sure you've got 3 things in place: skills, funding, and mindset. If you're confident that you've got these pieces right, then you're ready to start the hunt. And in the next video, now I'm going to talk about how we actually start finding businesses once we're ready to go.